Welcome, everyone, to our MSP webinar today. We will get started in just a few minutes. Martin, while we're waiting for folks to find their way in, I hear you just released a paper recently.
Well, that's true. And I have two halves of my life. One half with Veracent, and I'm sure we'll talk about that as we go along. The other is in my role as an economist. Spend about half of my time with the Productivity Institute, which is a research center, which is a consortium of 8 UK universities focused on the problem of the challenge of productivity growth, value creation. And since I've done a lot of work at the intersection of technology, economics, and productivity, I have a number of streams of research going on there. And yes, have just recently posted a paper around capital deepening, the productivity, and the fourth industrial revolution. So it's a bit of a new twist on an old concept of how technology is able to contribute to growth and to productivity improvement, but also to income, decreased income inequality. Let me put it that way. So it's an interesting topic these days.
That's great. That's great. Where was that published?
It's on the Productivity Institute website. It's just posted. So as you might know, in the academic world, these are very long cycles. The first challenge is to get agreement with one's colleagues internally, and then now we're circulating the paper for external review. And the challenge is to have enough reviewing going on before it gets submitted to a journal, so that the journal reviewers have already seen it. Part of the challenge in the peer review process. So that's how these things work.
That's great. What a fascinating second job to have running.
Yes. Yeah. It's very interesting work.
Wonderful. Wonderful. We are very glad that you could join us today. I think we are going to go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for joining. Today's event, Metrics for TQP in the New Normal, is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission is to create an environment for the 20,000 and growing members to answer questions that they would struggle to solve on their own, and help them see around corners that they may not know about. And so we do that through great live sessions like the one we're going to have today, through a robust online forum, and in the near future through a return to in-person events. So those of you who aren't members, you will get an invite to join afterwards, and we sure hope you will. Also, if you like this content, you will love the Revenue Excellence Summit. That is happening October 12th through 14th, where we will talk about the people, processes, and technology needed to get you ready for 2022. But enough about MSP. Today's session wouldn't be possible without sponsorship from the team at Veracent. So I'm going to hand it off to Martin to say a few words about Veracent. Martin?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. So Veracent is a sales performance management organization, or sometimes thought of as a revenue performance management. We operate really in 3 areas, and the simple way to think about it is plan, operate, and pay. So we're going to talk about the planning topic today, territory and quota planning. And we have a growing set of offerings in that space. And then in the operate space, this is really all about revenue intelligence and being able to gain more insight into both opportunities, the sales process, as well as the skill, productivity, and performance that sellers bring. And then finally, in the pay side of things, which probably is where Vericent is perhaps best known, around incentive compensation management, and how we're able to support our users, but also to simplify it and, importantly, speed up the process of being able to pay sellers. Many of these incentive compensation schemes are quite complex and oftentimes takes organizations quite a long time to work through the end of month or end of quarter process, and sellers don't like that too much. So being able to do to provide the function in a more timely fashion is very important. But in any event, those are the three areas where Vericent spends its time and its focus.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Martin, and thank you, Vericent. Today, we are talking about territory and quota planning, TQP. We have Martin, a great expert in the field, here to talk through this content. So before we get started, let's do some introduction. So Martin, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got involved in this topic?
Sure. I had spent 20 years at IBM, the last 10 of which as Chief Analytics Officer and Chief Economist. In the US, in particular, in the technology industry in the US, data science and economics as functional areas have come together as being closely related disciplines. So I was the fortunate experience of being able to lead a team focused in those areas. And of course, territory and quota planning, certainly for an organization the size of IBM, is very important and can be time consuming. So the analytics and automation and support that the team was able to provide certainly was able to help the broader sales community to be more effective. So that's really how I came to grow my knowledge in the TQP space.
Wonderful, wonderful. And my name is Karen Rohr. I am the moderator for today's event. I'm the head of customer success and sales strategy at Atrium, and spent the prior part of my career in sales operations, managing territory and quota planning processes for startups all the way up to public companies like LinkedIn. So very excited to have this conversation with you today, and excited to have all of our attendees here. First, a couple quick housekeeping notes. This event is being recorded. You will be able to access the recording and key takeaways on the previous events page of the Modern Sales Pros website. Second, if you have any questions for Martin as we're going through, please use the Q&A function, and we will be sure to get to as many of those as possible during the event. So on to the topic. So covering kind of territory and quota planning in the new normal, that is going to start with discussing what is state of the art in analytics and in machine learning ML tools that we can bring to that process. What kind of problem solving and motivation is sitting behind those tools? What is the difference in how you approach TQP for B2B versus B2C organizations? And we will wrap up with the progression of tools in support of TQP over the next few years. So let's go ahead and get started with the first of those points. So what is a state of the art today in terms of how we're using analytics, machine learning, other kinds of tools?
So like many business processes, my sense of it is we're still in the very, very early days. Now that's both good news and bad news. But I think, as we all know, a lot of this work is quite manual. Excel spreadsheets, through the benefit of our colleagues at Microsoft, LinkedIn's parent, certainly have provided a great deal of support over time. That has worked well, I would say, for many years. But increasingly, we find, particularly for larger organizations, there's always the problem or the risk that as spreadsheets get passed around, inconsistencies emerge and differences appear. And not only is the process time-consuming and inefficient, it can lead to problems and it can lead to errors. In addition, being able to balance territories, calculate quotas based on, say, the best data possible is very difficult in such an environment. Now, having said that, we shouldn't somehow think less of the sales profession. It's probably characteristic of many business processes. In fact, part of the reason for titling this session "The New Normal" is to think about the changes that we've seen just over the past year and a half. We've all experienced a rather dramatic shift in how we meet, as we're doing here today. We probably wouldn't have had a Zoom conference 2 years ago at this point, but we have identified as a community a more productive way of engaging, forced upon us to some degree, but nonetheless, we're not going to return to the old normal. We're going to continue probably in a hybrid fashion. Another great example of the change that we've seen over the past couple of years is around e-commerce. The ability to shop and buy and have delivered in a quite timely fashion in many instances, in a capability that has dramatically improved over the past year and a half. But I use those two as illustrations to say it's that sort of change that will characterize the new normal in many business processes, and the sales management, sales leadership, and the sales profession will certainly be among the leaders in adopting and adapting to the new normal, and begin to move away from the old ways of doing things. In many cases, we won't return to the old way of doing things.
And how do you see, as we start to move out of those kind of Excel spreadsheets, what are the ways that you're really seeing kind of ML in particular start to be applied?
So there are a couple of ways. Certainly in terms of being able to understand the opportunity that exists at the territory level. This is oftentimes a quite difficult set of analytical or empirical challenges that it presents. Data oftentimes are not readily available, but when we are able to assemble sufficient data, particularly in the business-to-business space, that we can be able to do the kind of modeling and machine learning exercises that allow us to have a better understanding of detailed opportunity, no longer relying solely on the input of sellers for their opinion of what the territory consists of, but to have an analytical approach that can be confirmed by the judgment of sellers and sales leaders at the territory level. Similarly, closely related is going to be quota setting, being able to understand what the sales quotas can be territory by territory. Those would be two examples. Now, there are others, but those would be two early examples. Let me put it that way.
Wonderful. And when you talk about kind of bringing ML to territory design, are you thinking of that more with a goal of we as an organization want to have balanced territories, and using that kind of process to get to that outcome in a way that we couldn't before?
Yeah, absolutely. So therein lies part of the challenge, which we'll get into as we go along, I'm sure. But just focusing on the territory balance, first of all, it's very important. Number one, for seller productivity. We want to be able to put sellers in a position where they have a reasonable chance of being able to engage with a set of customers across in their territory, but also for fairness, so that sellers feel like they all have an equal chance of succeeding and growing their income, and being able to build the next swimming pool or whatever it is. And so the balance, the consideration of balance has many different dimensions to it, both in terms of the firm, the organization side, in terms of productivity and achieving sales results, as well as from the seller side, so that sellers all have an equal chance of being successful.
Wonderful. What other problems are sales leaders trying to solve when they're using these kinds of tools?
Well, there are a couple. One is being able to understand who the most effective sellers are, who the least effective sellers are, how are sellers performing relative to the potential in their territory, relative to the needs of their territory. This oftentimes can be quite difficult depending upon the sales cycle, perhaps the size of the relationship between the selling organization and the buying organization. So, there are really a couple, in most simplistic terms, there are only a couple of things that sales leaders worry about: achieving a sales goal and getting the real killer sellers in their region. So being able to understand who's performing well, who's performing not so well, being able to do that assessment in a fair and detailed way is important. So it's not only being able to establish the territory and the quota, but also being able to understand how sellers are performing against that territory and against those objectives.
And so when sales leaders are looking for a better approach to this, what are the things that you're looking at that are motivating them to search out new options?
Yeah, so there are really two. So, and one is on the territory planning side, and the other is on the quota setting side. So let's talk about territories first. Setting territories is oftentimes filled with many different conflicts, and that's really that conflict is what sales leaders feel most often, particularly in the business-to-business environment. There is the need for the seller's skill to be matched with the needs of the buyer. So seller skill is important, and being able to achieve that match, a little bit like in the dating world, being able to figure out from Match.com who is best matched with the needs of the buyer can be a challenge, number one. But then number two, there's also the issue of balance, which we just talked about, territory balance. We want to match the skill of the seller with the needs of the client, and at the same time, create a set of territories that are reasonably well balanced. And then third, there's also the issue of location. You can have sellers, we're largely talking about the United States here, but the same thought applies to the rest of the world. You can have sellers flying all over the country who have the right skills for the right client. That can get very expensive. Many instances, it makes a great deal of sense depending upon the opportunity involved. But being able to trade off the skill match versus location versus the balance, that creates a real struggle, and oftentimes results in sales leaders who are quite conflicted about the outcome of their territory plan. And in our research would suggest that only about a quarter of sales leaders are ultimately satisfied with what they produce. And then on the quota setting side, The issue with quotas, of course, is how frequently are they changed? It can be an administrative burden to have to reset quotas every month or every quarter. It can be without sufficient capability. It can be a real challenge, a real administrative, time-consuming process. Again, depending on the industry, depending upon the offering, to the extent that quotas need to be reset frequently, that really is the second area where we see the greatest challenge and conflict and discomfort and lessened satisfaction, shall we say.
Yeah, it sounds like to some extent this may be an iterative process over time where you are assessing seller skills by what have they delivered versus what you thought the territory ought to be able to deliver, and then can better match them in the future. Is that a fair way to think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the time element, I think, turns out to be an important one. Whether it's assessing the sellers or assessing the territories and the quotas, those are three different assessments. You know, the typical scenario is an organization is on a calendar year, fiscal year. So there's some planning that goes on in the fall, let's say September, October, November. The end of the year arrives at the end of December. Sales results become available, say in the first half of January. All the quotas are set, all the territories are established, but oh wait, our C-level executives say, we didn't like the results that we just saw here on January 10th or 15th or whenever it is. We need to change the territories. We need to change the quotas. So now we go through another process that could take 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and pretty soon we're at the risk of getting to the end of the first quarter before sellers have their territories and their quotas. So now a quarter of the year is gone before all of that is in place. With sufficient automation, sufficient analytics, sufficient capability, you know, we envision a process where it can be done with more speed, so that maybe in September or October, a preliminary view of the next year is published in terms of territories and quotas. Maybe it's updated in November or December. And then a third iteration occurs in January once you see results. So that, again, much like I was saying earlier on incentive compensation, being able to do all this with greater speed and greater flexibility has tremendous benefit in terms of allowing the sellers to do what they love to do, what they want to do, and have them know what's being expected in a timely fashion. And oftentimes between a first draft in October and a final draft in January, there are smaller changes that occur, even though maybe at the aggregate level, the C-level executives are getting to a result that they feel more comfortable with. For the individual sellers, they're seeing small progressive changes over that time, but they understand what the next year is going to look like. And it's not all of a sudden a surprise at the end of March or something. So to your question, timing and time is a very important element in all of this.
And who are the sales leaders that you've seen be most active in trying to kind of find a better way?
So I would say that there's a bit of a new breed that we're seeing. And those are what's often referred to as chief revenue officers. And typically, well, let me say it this way. The older version of the sales leader was typically a guy, typically had 20 or 30 years of experience, who always says, I've been carrying a bag for 20 years and I know how to do this, and there's nothing you can give me or tell me that I don't already know how to do. The chief revenue officers, many more women represented, much more mixed gender, certainly mixed ethnic groups and race. And I say that because we all bring different experiences, different life experiences, and our backgrounds matter in terms of how innovative we can be and how we approach different problems. In addition to a much more diverse community, we also see chief revenue officers who have much stronger analytic skills. in many instances, may have studied engineering or science as undergraduates or graduates, and so are very comfortable with the kind of analytics that can be done and will be done. So the emergence of this new breed of sales leader who have a much different and broader range of capabilities. And oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, probably 10 or 20 years younger as well. All of this makes a big difference. And, you know, we see these chief revenue officers as looking for the enhanced capability in this space.
Yeah, and so perhaps some of those people with different backgrounds bringing that more analytical mindset are more inclined towards the tools that can help support this.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no question about it. And that's why I say there's oftentimes a lower level of satisfaction with the outcome that's getting produced, and the desire to deal with the conflict inherent in trying to balance all of the considerations in setting territories and quota. And from the chief revenue officer's perspective, the CRO's perspective, today we're only talking about territory and quota management. They also have to worry about sales operations, revenue intelligence, tying all that together with incentive compensation. So the much broader set of analytic and automation capabilities is a place where the CROs are really focused as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of times we've mentioned some things and saying, hey, especially for B2B, something like that. How do TQP problems, challenges differ for B2B versus B2C organizations? So
B2B organizations, not always, but more often than not, tend to be in a space where there's more change, more innovation, more, I'm going to use the word dynamism, if you will. Technology is changing, offerings are changing, competitors are changing, coming in and in some cases going out of the market. So there's a great deal of there's more instability in the business to business side, which means that there's going to be territories that may have to be reset, quotas may have to be adjusted periodically. And even if territories aren't wholly reset, you know, there are going to be differences in terms of which clients may be in a territory or out of a territory, and so there's movement over the course of a year. In the business to consumer space, first of all, the products tend to be a bit more stable. We all know the brands of consumer products, and there are of course new products and new flavors and new colors, but they're relatively stable. And the territories, oftentimes, depending upon the nature of the firm, the offering, can be quite well defined geographically. If products are being delivered to retail outlets, and there are 10,000 retail outlets, say across the U.S. or North America, we know pretty much where they are and who's going to cover them, because there's oftentimes some physical delivery involved as well as the sales. But where the business to consumer teams have a great challenge is around managing the quota. Because these are relatively well-established organizations, oftentimes publicly held, there is a real top-down driven process of real commitment to achieving a quota, a sales goal, and a set of quotas that come from that sales goal. And so there's a lot of pressure. You don't get any relief from that quota. It has to be delivered maybe at a regional or a district level. Oftentimes, some of those retail outlets will close over the course of a year. Could be a flood, could be a fire, wildfire, could be any number of incidents that occur. Hurricanes, of course, we've seen this year particularly across the southern tier of the U.S., but even in New Jersey and New York, we saw tremendous flooding in the U.S. Wildfires out west. The problem is the sales leaders don't get any relief. You have to move that quota somewhere else. You may have stores or outlets that have ceased operation, but you're not relieved from that quota, so you've got to move that somewhere else. So that means there's a constant updating of quotas literally from month to month, even more frequently than quarter to quarter. So there's a lot of focus on being able to manage that quota setting process. And that's where the analytics and now increasingly the machine learning become involved to begin to balance those territories, adjust to the changes that are occurring, because there's no relief involved in being able to deliver the quota. So it's a bit of a different world between the business to business world and the business to consumer world because of the nature of the products and the size of the selling organizations, as well as the ownership, typically publicly held.
And what about kind of how are the problems and challenges differing by enterprise size?
Well, that's an interesting question. The answer is not much, which is quite different from the business to business and business to consumer, right? There are big differences between the B2B and the B2C. There aren't a lot of differences by enterprise size. The one obvious one, of course, is that large organizations tend to engage with other large organizations. So whether we call them named accounts or national accounts, there are typically a very significant number of them with large organizations, whereas with medium and small organizations, there are always large accounts, large clients, large important clients, flagship clients that are handled as named accounts, but there tend to be fewer in number and are handled perhaps in almost a one-off basis in some instances. But aside from the named accounts or the national accounts, the focus either on industry accounts or geography accounts really turns out to be quite similar. Industry accounts typically are where the industry skill is unique and needs to be provided. And there are only so many of those that any one sales organization can cover. And then, of course, once having identified who those industry accounts are, the balance of the accounts become geography accounts and then covered on a bit more of a geographic basis. But that all looks pretty similar, independent of enterprise size. The main difference just being the named accounts.
And the named account difference is perhaps more of a difference in size of account being sold to in those B2B organizations, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. No question about it. When you have one large organization selling to another large organization, typically those are quite important partnerships, quite important relationships where there are, I'll call it mission critical parts or materials or services that are being provided from one organization to another. So you're right, they are deeper, they are quite important partnerships and are managed in a bit of a different way. Not to diminish any medium or small size business, but it's just the size of the two organizations that tend to heighten the importance of the relationship.
And for companies selling to more kind of SMB type organizations where maybe they're verticalizing by industry or having geographic territories, are you seeing more organizations go to by industry or by geography, or a mix where maybe some highly regulated industries get pulled out and everything else is divvied up?
The one quite notable exception is financial services. Financial service firms are almost a segment or a cluster in and of themselves, because of the, first of all, of course, the nature of the offering, and the, I'll call it the importance in many cases. We're talking about the ultimately the wealth and the income of the end user client. So financial service firms tend to have relatively a greater degree of stability, both in terms of territories that are set as well as quotas that are established. However, other firms, manufacturing, technology, even medical and healthcare, become a bit more dynamic, shall we say, in terms of what they're faced with.
Excellent. And so shifting to kind of our forward-looking lens, so how should we expect what state of the art is to progress over the next few years?
Yeah, I think we're going to find that there's going to be a group of leading edge sales organizations who are going to adopt a lot of the analytic capabilities that we've been referencing in terms of being able to make use of certainly machine learning, in some instances, perhaps some artificial intelligence capabilities, although as you know, the data requirements are so much larger, as well as the computing and the skill and resource requirements. But the data science opportunity here to be able to improve the effectiveness of the management of territories and quotas is really going to, I would say, maybe even explode. It's going to grow quite significantly. And so we'll have some early on some leaders who are already trying to figure this out. And once that early success appears, and we'll begin to see knowledge diffuse across other industries and other firms, and the ability of firms to absorb that new capability, that new knowledge will grow over time. So over a period of years, this will grow and spread and expand to the point where it may take, I don't know if it's measured in years or decades, but over some period of time, we're going to see a really completely different manner in which sales performance is managed with the kind of capabilities that exist, both in terms of really along three dimensions. One is just the sheer computing power, right? Whether it's the Amazon cloud or the Microsoft cloud, it becomes inexpensive enough that you can do things quickly, but you can also do them in a much less expensive way. Then increased data science, the use of the data science tools to be able to, when we think about machine learning and artificial intelligence, it's really all about prediction. We're trying to predict what the successful territory looks like, we're trying to predict what the successful quota is. I always use the simple-minded example when folks ask me about machine learning or artificial intelligence. We use it every day. When you get on your phone and you text a message and your phone suggests to you the word you're trying to type, that prediction is a little machine learning algorithm in your phone that's giving you the recommended word that you're trying to type. And that's the same thing that's being done here. We're trying to recommend or predict what the successful territory looks like. We're trying to recommend or predict what the successful quota should be set at. And then along with both the computing and the data science comes the process transformation, how we manage sales organizations in a different way to be more effective and be able to achieve the results that we're looking for. The transformation is a key part of it. We often say, if you transform a broken process, you end up with a transformed broken process. So we want to make sure that we're fixing our processes, we're managing well, we're engaging with sellers, we're engaging with clients, and being able to apply the automation in ways that perhaps we couldn't in the past.
And with that kind of new analytics, ML innovations appearing, how do you see those solutions being delivered?
Well, these are largely all software as a service offerings. So now that gets into issues around what's sometimes called a hybrid cloud, because we have data coming from a CRM site, most often Salesforce.com. They have obviously a high market share, so that's quite frequent. But you need to be able to ingest that CRM data with some frequency, and then be able to also at the same time have access to human resource data. We have to know who the sellers are. We have to know what their tenure is, what their experience is, what their skills are, where they're located, et cetera, what their performance has been. And then number three, we need to be able to ingest the financial performance data from the previous year or the previous years to be able to understand, and because they are important contributors to the potential of any given territory. We want to know the extent of a relationship with a set of customers. That's an important input to the algorithms that are allowing us to not only set the territories, but to be able to establish quotas as well. So bringing together these 4 or 5 different sources of data to be able to then bring them all in one, they have to be all in one place, because otherwise the latency is such that nobody has the patience to wait while all of this computing is going on somewhere, right? It has to be quick and timely. Particularly sellers and sales leaders have, by the nature of who they are, have no patience at all for all of this. So we have to have the capability to be able to do it in a low latency fashion and have a very effective user interface. But all of this has to come together to be able to deliver this capability through a software as a service environment, typically being driven off a cloud deployment.
Excellent. We're going to shift a little bit to questions. The first one was a question that somebody submitted during their registration process, which is, what is the best way to evaluate whether your territory and quota planning has been successful?
Yeah, great. That's a great question. There are many chief financial officers who ask the same question, right? Sales organizations are a big investment that most companies make, quite expensive, but can be quite productive. So if you're sitting in the CFO's chair, you want to know what's the return I'm getting from my investment. So being able to do that evaluation, perhaps more frequently than once a year, is going to be an important part of this. So number one, we have to be able to understand the productivity of the sellers across the different territories. Which territories are more productive, which are less productive? To what extent is that any differential in productivity attributable to the seller themselves, him or herself? To what extent might it be as a result of how the territory is established, as a result of skill or lack of skill, or location, or distance, or time being consumed by travel or other administrative tasks? And then secondly, quota achievement. That always becomes a quite controversial topic. What proportion of sellers should achieve their quota, and what's more or less effective? And being able to understand the proportion of the sales force that's achieving quota, which are not, and why that might be the case. So there are a number of dimensions for evaluating the effectiveness of the territory and quota planning process.
Excellent. Let's do one last audience question, which is, how in a post-COVID world where we've seen much higher SaaS adoption than ever before, how does that change how we think about TQP?
Well, it changes how we think about it because the capabilities and the tools have expanded. It's no longer each organization creating or rolling its own or using a set of spreadsheets, but the organizations are being able to, in a single cloud infrastructure, bring together the variety of data sources that are necessary to a software as a service offering that's being exercised by a large number of clients on a regular basis, so that it's you're not dealing with a software development process where within an organization the software developers are building something that's unique, but rather you're stressing and stress testing a SaaS offering that's being used by a wide variety of organizations. I would suggest that the source of competitive advantage for most organizations is how the sellers sell, not necessarily what tools they are used to plan and manage the sellers. There's no reason to think we have to have unique tools within every organization. We want to be able to do this in a straightforward way to allow the competitive advantage to be the quality of the relationship between the seller and the client.
And so there, if I can restate, the territory and quota planning process is only in service of setting the sales organization up for success. So building that internally versus buying a solution is maybe not the best use of internal resources. Is that?
That seems to be the way the world is headed. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I think that I don't see any other questions coming in. Audience members, if you have them, please do submit them. But Martin, if you had one kind of tweet length takeaway for the audience, what would that be?
Well, there's an opportunity here for leaders to emerge, meaning that leading organizations, highly productive organizations, have an opportunity to, shall I say, jump on the technology, jump on the automation, jump on the opportunity, and get an advantage that may last 2, 3, 4 years while others are catching up. We, as you referenced a moment ago, we've gone through a 1.5-year period where we've all seen the potential benefits around digital technology and digital engagement, and the sales performance management process, like every other business process, now has an opportunity to achieve similar success.
Wonderful. I think one of my takeaways is with the sort of changing face of who's running sales organizations, we're seeing a lot of innovation, and really leaning into that innovation will set organizations up to be successful going forward. We do have one question in the chat around setting up territories, best practices for industries that are peculiar. Sorry, what is the, Althea, what is the specific question?
Especially. Well, I would say that many industries are peculiar, and the many sub-industries are peculiar. But look, we need to begin with the reason why I say I wouldn't focus so much on the peculiarity is because we're starting with a list of prospective customers. This is all about producing lists of customers. We want to take those customers and assign some subset of them to one territory, another subset of them to a second territory. So we're just we know the list of prospects, and the challenge is to be able to allocate those prospects across territories, and then to be able to assign a quota to each one of those territories based on the prospects that are our clients that are in those territories. So certainly there may be some peculiarities in terms of skill. There may be some peculiarities in terms of location. They may be clustered all together or spread far apart, or maybe more remote, or whatever the case may be. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we're trying to deliver a list of customers and prospects and a quota to give to a seller as input into an incentive compensation plan. And it's nothing more complicated than that.
Yeah, well, we also talked earlier, Martin, about balancing territories. If there are enough peculiarities, then maybe the territories aren't balanced, but having the quotas match each of the peculiar territories is the important piece there. Is that
sure? That's
right?
certainly possible. And as I was saying earlier, the balance, if you will, is really achieved by understanding the potential across each of the various clients or groups of clients. So it's always a conflict. I shouldn't say it's a conflict. Sales leaders are often in conflict over how to succeed at doing that, and that's just part of the challenge that we're dealing with here.
Yeah, excellent. If folks have any other questions, you can send them in the chat real quick, but otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us today. We have loved having you here. Thank you to our wonderful sponsor, Verisant. They're doing great things. Be sure to check them out. And thank you to Martin for his time and for this great content. Reminder, recordings and key takeaways will be available on the MSP site shortly. Don't forget to check out upcoming events, and stay safe, and we will see you all next time.